If you're looking for all the latest pro football news and action, you've come to the right place. This is the Football Game Tonight podcast. I'm your host, John Kuzma. On the ticker today, we have the Pattick Surtain story. We're going to start off with that. We're going to do the Najee Harris story. I think you guys will like that one. We'll talk a little bit about Jerry Jeudy. Then we'll finish the episode with the Joe Burrow and then the Trevor Lawrence stories. So let's start with the headliner, Pattick Surtain. So Chad Ochocinco, a.k.a. Chad Johnson, held a wide receiver camp for all the wide receivers in the National Football League. A bunch of players went down there. Jamar Chase was there. T. Higgins was there. And one thing all these wide receivers were talking about was how good Pattick Surtain was, to the point where every wide receiver at this camp was trying to talk about how to beat Pattick Surtain off the line of scrimmage. They said Pattick Surtain is so good at bumping at the line of scrimmage. He does this one-hand bump that he reroutes these wide receivers' routes, and that ruins the rhythm and timing between the quarterback and the wide receiver on that play. So it's pretty clear that these wide receivers were practicing their release off the line of scrimmage to adjust to how good Pattick Surtain is in that bump technique. And I think this just says so much about how good Pattick Surtain is, because all these wide receivers at this camp were trying to game plan, players not even on the same team, wide receivers from all over the league, different teams, were trying to game plan on how to beat Pattick Surtain at the line of scrimmage. And even Ochocinco, who's a guy that was notorious for being a great route runner and for all of his fun antics, touchdown celebrations. We know him from all those things, but he's known for being a great route runner. He was trying to tell these young guys, hey, maybe get low, rip through it with almost like a rip technique that a defensive end would use, trying to turn the corner on an offensive tackle to get to the quarterback. Those were the things that Ochocinco was telling these wide receivers to use at the line of scrimmage to be able to get past Pattick Surtain. So for Pattick Surtain, if you want to, take something away from this, this guy is just on another level. It's funny, too, because when I think about Pattick Surtain, I always think back to his dad on the Miami Dolphins. I also think back to Sam Madison. I know I'm getting old, but Pattick Surtain Sr. and Sam Madison were like the best 1-2 punch at the cornerback position on defense, at the corners for like several years with the Miami Dolphins. Those guys were just unstoppable. But it's astonishing that Pattick Surtain Jr. is already better than his dad. He's already better than his dad. To me, that's mind-blowing because Pattick Surtain Sr. was so good. Such a good football player. And his son in his young career is already better than his dad. And think about when you see these big-time athletes that have these kids. Are the kids usually better than the dad? No. Were Michael Jordan's kids better than him? Are LeBron James' kids better than him? It doesn't happen because it's just such big shoes to fill. And it's just hard to live up to those expectations. So for Pattick Surtain Jr. to already be better than his dad was, there's just not enough good things that you can say about this guy. I could talk about Pattick Surtain and just how dominant he is at that corner position in the National Football League all day, because he's, come into the NFL and just be this big-time player that is feared by all these wide receivers in the league, to the point where they're having wide receiver camps that turn into how to beat, Pattick Surtain Jr. functions. Wow. Look at Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase was the guy that was talking about, Pattick Surtain's so good, we have to figure out how to play through his contact because he gets that one hand bump on you. He reroutes you. So Jamar Chase, who's the best wide receiver in the NFL, was by far the best wide receiver in the NFL this past year. Wasn't even close. He completely dominated, and he's the guy talking the most about how do we adjust to Pattick Surtain? How do we find a way to be able to, combat his physicality at the line of scrimmage? How to combat how good he is in that bump technique. And it just shows that Pattick Surtain can line up across from these wide receivers, even the very best, the Jamar Chases, the Justin Jeffersons, everybody else, the top wide receivers in the National Football League. He can line up right across from you. He's playing right in your face, looking right at you, and it doesn't matter because he's so physical that he finds a way to win in those one-on-one matchups. That says a lot about Pattick Surtain, too. He doesn't back down. He doesn't have to play a bail technique where you're playing cover 3 and you're playing 5 to 7 yards off and playing deep outside third. He can line up right in your face, one-on-one, man-to-man coverage, whether it's cover 0, cover 1, doesn't matter. Or he's good enough to be flexible in his game and play those cover 2, flat technique, or that cover 3 bailing outside third technique, or cover 4 bailing deep quarters technique. It doesn't matter. The guy can do everything. He's well versed in any situation, but it seems like he does like that press technique. So cover 0, cover 1, even cover 2, because you can hit that wide receiver and then get to your flat, sit there and kind of look at the quarterback's eyes and then make your adjustments. I also seen on film, he's very good at, let's say there's a shallow route in his zone and there's a deep route in his zone. He can come up on that shallow route, bait the quarterback into throwing that deep route against him, and then he goes from the shallow route deep onto the deep route. It's just so fluid how he can come up on that shallow route, bait the quarterback to throwing over top of him, and then as soon as that arm cocks back for that quarterback, he's already breaking deep. So he's covering 2 guys in his area, and he's able to still bait these quarterbacks, which is it's a tell that Pattick Surtain is also a very smart player, because we know he has the athleticism because he can fly up on the shallow route and then have the speed to get back deep, cover the ground, and make the play. But he's also smart enough to bait you too. That takes an intelligent player to fly up and make you think you have the deep route over top of him. But as soon as that arm cocks back, before it even leaves the quarterback's hands, it's still going backwards as the arm cocks back. He's already breaking on the deep route, covers the ground, tracks the football, completes the interception. That's why Pattick Surtain has become the best cornerback in the NFL, a guy that is a big play waiting to happen. I think about what he did against the Raiders. He, in particular, owned Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew just didn't have anything for Pattick Surtain. I think about the pick 6 where he went coast to coast. Gardner Minshew is leading the Raiders offense into the end zone, trying to get 6 points. They're in the red zone. And what happens, he throws towards Pattick Surtain. Pattick Surtain jumps the route, goes all the way the other way to the house for 6 points for the Broncos defense. A situation where the Raiders should have been looking at points, whether it was a touchdown or a field goal, but Pattick Surtain just flips the outcome to the point where the Broncos defense is scoring and putting points on the board for the Broncos. That was big. I think about when he, again against the Raiders, Pattick Surtain is guarding, I think, Brock Bowers, gets in there, the football gets tipped up. Pattick Surtain tracks the tip football, almost like the tip drill that you practice. If you were a football player growing up, you remember the tip drill where one guy tips it, the next guy picks it off. He's able to locate the football. He gets in there and breaks up the pass on Brock Bowers. The ball gets tipped up in there. He locates the football, brings it in. Just great instincts from Pattick Surtain, too. Makes a lot of plays. I saw on film the T. Higgins play. It was like a slant route. T. Higgins catches the football. Pattick Surtain gets in there. I think forced the fumble on that play. So just a lot of big plays from this guy. And like I said, already better than his dad. And his dad was one of the all-time greats in the NFL. Him and Sam Madison locked it down for that Dolphins defense at the corner positions. And, you just feared throwing against those Dolphins corners because they had Pattick Surtain and Sam Madison. There was no options on the outside because one of those guys was good enough to pick you off and potentially go the other way with it. Well, Pattick Surtain has a child, Pattick Surtain Jr., and now Pattick Surtain Jr. is fulfilling his potential, already better than his dad. I also think about, we talked about Pattick Surtain Jr.'s intelligence. How much of that goes back to playing for Nick Saban at Alabama? Because Nick Saban, we all know how prepared his players are when they go to the NFL. He gets the best out of these guys, not only athletically, but he builds them up from a mental standpoint too. These guys understand how to be intelligent football players when they come out of Alabama playing for Nick Saban. I know Nick Saban's not there anymore, but you can't tell me that playing for Nick Saban didn't help Pattick Surtain become the player he is today, because he's just on another level. And so much of that goes back to playing for Nick Saban at Alabama, learning how to prepare, learning how to give maximum effort on every play, not only in games but in practice too, where Nick Saban demands greatness. Breaking down film, knowing more than your opponents do. It's not just your play on the field, it's also the psychology of being a football player. You have to know more than the team you're going up against. So you have to know the plays they run. You have to know what they like in down and distances. You have to know who their best players are and how they're going to be utilized in certain situations. It's obvious that Pattick Surtain has that part of the game down as well. So just so many things going for him: athletic, intelligent, a ball hawk, great at breaking on the football, can finish these plays going the other way to the house in the end zone for 6, turning the Broncos defense into a scoring defense. I think about how he's always right there on the defender's hip. When you watch Pattick Surtain on film, he doesn't get lost at all. He never gets lost. He's always right there on the hip. So that goes back to intelligence too. He knows his assignment. He knows where he has to be depending on what coverage the Broncos defense is running as a whole. So really, really good football player. Fun to watch on film because he does so many things well. Very dynamic, well-versed in any coverage. Better than his dad already. And, the Broncos have a defensive player that is a foundational piece for their defense, because he's going to be great I don't see him dropping off ever. I could see him being one of the all-time greats in the NFL. I think about Charles Woodson, Deion Sanders. I think he could, be in that class of player just because he's got all the tools. And when you have all the tools and you have it upstairs too, where you have the mental capacity to understand every single assignment, how to play every single technique, where you should position yourself based off the coverage you're playing, knowing all the opponents' strengths and weaknesses, knowing where their best player is on at all times, all those little intricacies that go into the mental part of the game. I think it's so important to talk about those things with Pattick Surtain too, one of the smartest players on the field at all times. All right, let's move on. The Najee Harris story. So I don't know if you guys have heard this. I'm sure you guys have, because it's been all over the headlines, and it's been covered by a bunch of media outlets. So I'm sure you guys have heard this. But if you haven't, Najee Harris was involved in a firework accident. I think it was on 4th of July. And basically this firework hit Najee Harris in the eye. There was some fears whether or not he would have blindness in one of his eyes. Well, his agent has recently come out and says that Najee Harris is going to be good to go. He'll be ready for the upcoming season. But man, it's like we've seen this story before. I think about what happened to Jason Pierre-Paul. Remember what happened to Jason Pierre-Paul? And thankfully he was able to come back and, get his career back on track and still had a great career after the firework incident. But it's like, it's hard to see this stuff happen. I think it's time to stick with sparklers if you're an NFL player. I think it's time to maybe go to your local fireworks show, let someone else set off the fireworks, and make sure you're within safe distance so the firework, that explodes doesn't rain down on you. Because these guys, their careers depend on their bodies. Some people, maybe, other fields and other lines of work where maybe, you're supervising people and, you just have to make sure people are reeled in. Maybe your body isn't as important in terms of, as a running back, you got to be able to see the field. We always talk about ball carrier vision. Where are your cutback lanes? Where's the daylight you have to run to? Your vision is so important as a running back. Jason Pierre-Paul, a guy that came off the edge and had to use his hands to sack the quarterback. Remember the damage that happened to his hand and to his fingers when that firework went off in his hands. As an NFL player, your body is so important. Maybe more important than most professions. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of professions where your body is important. But like if you were a writer, I think you could use talk to text on your phone, and you could talk and you could write a lot of stuff out, and then you could take it and put it in Chat GPT to be edited. So, or a manager, like I said, reeling in and making sure your team's motivated and overseeing people. Maybe your body isn't as important, but as an NFL player, you're nothing without your body. So Najee Harris and his vision being damaged, which, sucks for him because, he's leaving the Steelers. He's on the Chargers now. He's in a good environment for him where he's got Jim Harbaugh as his head coach. He has Justin Herbert as his quarterback. Things were looking up for Najee Harris, and hopefully he does make a full recovery to the point where he's not impacted in any way by this firework accident. But these NFL players have to protect themselves. And I'm just to the point where me, who's not even an NFL player, I was a semi-pro football player. My family owned a semi-pro football team. But now that I'm away from the game and I work in sports media, I don't even want anything to do with fireworks. Keep those things away from me. I can watch from afar as people are on a bar setting off fireworks. And I can watch them up in the air. But if you think I'm going to buy fireworks and set them off, no chance in hell. I've seen so many horror stories from fireworks. Every July we see them. I think about Jason Pierre-Paul a lot because he got it really bad. Najee Harris is just the latest example. There was some other guy that got it really bad on 4th of July. His name was Four something. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But fire like a M80 or something went off in his hands. It's like, I don't want anything to do with fireworks. And if I did, it would be something weak, like sparklers are the ones where you light and they spray like a fountain above them with the colors. I don't want anything that explodes around me. Anything that can blow up and hurt me or my family or people I care about. I don't want anything like that around me. And unfortunately for Najee Harris, he obviously caught some explosion or some debris from a firework happened and it hit him in the eye, and we'll see if it impacts him at all. Now his agent came out and pushed back and said he's going to be ready to go, but what is an agent supposed to say? If I was his agent, I'd be saying the same thing. Like I would be trying to calm down all the scrutiny and all the people that are suspicious about how it's going to affect his play on the field. As an agent, that's your job to kind of downplay things and be like, my guy's good to go. You're not going to have any worries. That doesn't mean that's how it's actually going to play out on the field, because if he's blurring his peripherals and he can't see when the defense is over pursuing and he has to cut back, or if he can't see the holes opening up as well, or if he can't see a little daylight over near the right sidelines that he should run to evade the flow of the defense. Suddenly, it hurts Najee Harris's ability to make big plays for that Chargers offense, which then hurts, the Chargers getting Najee Harris. Because when they go out and they get Najee Harris, they're thinking about, hey, how can we add something to this offense? A guy that's a physical ball carrier, a guy that can take pressure off Justin Herbert. And we know that the Chargers love to run the football under Jim Harbaugh. I think about what J.K. Dobbins was able to do there. He was pretty good in that system. So there's going to be opportunities there for Najee Harris. The Chargers just need Najee Harris to be the best version of himself. Can he be that if he can't see the field as well? Can he be that if it's harder to see the pursuit of the defense? Because things are so bang. It's so fast. You just see blurs, basically colors coming at you, which is the opposing team's jersey, and you got to be able to stop on a dime and react and change directions and make a jump cut, like I said, on a dime. If Najee Harris isn't able to do those things, it's going to be disappointing, especially when it's something like that can be avoided. If you get hurt on the field, that's one thing, and nobody is upset with you if you get hurt on the field. It's a disappointment, but everybody realizes it's part of the game. If you get hurt on 4th of July with fireworks, now people are questioning, like, why didn't you do a good enough job of protecting yourself? Why didn't you back up a little bit so you weren't out of the blast radius to the point where you put yourself in danger? Why did you jeopardize your team's chances of success by getting injured in such a stupid way? It sucks because it could have just been a freak accident, but those are the questions people are going to ask when you get hurt in a firework incident. So I feel for Najee Harris because, like I said, it could have been a freak incident. It could have been something that just, maybe someone lit off a firework, the firework zipped his way, blew up right by his eye, and he just got a bad beat. It really could have just been that. Things happen in life that we can't predict, and sometimes it's not our fault. We just took a bad beat. But the people in the NFL are going to constantly ask those questions that I just said. Why did you put yourself in bad position? Why did you jeopardize your team's chances of winning? How come you did this to the Chargers when they took a chance on you? You know how the fans and the media and people inside these organizations work. They ask those questions. That they're going to look at you sideways if something like this happens. People were doing the same thing to Jason Pierre-Paul. How could you put yourself in such a bad situation? We should have empathy for Najee Harris and Jason Pierre-Paul because they went through horrible situations, something that is unfortunate that they had to deal with. But there's always going to be those people who ask those questions because they're suspicious of why you did something that they perceive to be so stupid. Now, I don't know the situation with Najee Harris. It seems like it was just an unfortunate situation. It's just the reality of the situation of how things work in the National Football League with fans, media, and people that work within these organizations. And we all know how, narratives get formed. If a bunch of people in the league form this narrative about you that you're reckless and you make bad decisions, you put yourself in bad situations, boom, you can be out of the league like that. Now, like I said, I'm hoping Najee Harris heals up. I hope his agent's right. I hope he does bounce back. I hope he hits the ground running in this fresh start with the Chargers. I hope he steps into J.K. Dobbins' old role and, just lights it up for this Chargers offense. And I hope they go on to have success. I'm a fan of Jim Harbaugh. I'm from Michigan. I'm a University of Wolverines fan. I'm a Lions fan. So I'm a fan of Jim Harbaugh, what he did for the Wolverines. I would like to see Jim Harbaugh, after leaving the Wolverines, go and have success with the Chargers. I think he's on the right path. He's going to need Najee Harris to do his thing to make sure this Chargers team's in the hunt. But They're heading in the right direction. They just need all their players to be at their best. That includes this new acquisition of Najee Harris. Moving on, we have the Jerry Jeudy story. So Jerry Jeudy asked to be traded from the Broncos. Wasn't happy there. And remember, when Jerry Jeudy was with the Broncos, it was Courtland Sutton that kind of overshadowed Jerry Jeudy. Courtland Sutton was the number one with the Broncos, and Jerry Jeudy was on the opposite side of the field as the number two. Jerry Jeudy asked to be traded by the Broncos, gets shipped out from the Broncos to the Browns. So it goes from Denver to Cleveland. I have to say, that ended up being a great move for Jerry Jeudy because he's better with the Browns than he ever was with the Broncos. Jerry Jeudy had his best year as a pro last year. It was pretty obvious that he had the trust of Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson and Jerry Jeudy were on the same page. They were making a lot of plays together. We'll see moving forward if Jerry Jeudy can have the trust of Joe Flacco, if Joe Flacco does win that job for the Browns. Whether or not that's the case, it's obvious that up until this point, before this upcoming season has started, it's been a good move going from the Broncos to the Browns for Jerry Jeudy. He's been better with the Browns than he ever was for the Broncos. He's been a focal point of the Browns offense instead of being that number two wide receiver with the Broncos. He's been a focal point for the Browns. A lot of the offense runs through him. He's clearly getting most of the targets and most of the receptions, putting up big numbers, and having a huge impact for that Browns offense. So it's obvious that not only has he found a home with the Browns, he's also found the perfect role for him too, to the point where he's going from that number two guy to being the lead role. So it's almost like going from a supporting actor to being the man in the lead role. You're the lead role now. So I think that adjustment and that change in role has been great for Jerry Jeudy. The change in location from Denver to Cleveland has been great for Jerry Jeudy. It's obvious that he's been great for the Browns. He's kind of taken the next step in his career. And, I don't know if he would have been able to do that with the Broncos. For some reason, he was good with the Broncos, but he wasn't great, where it's pretty obvious that with the Browns, he's becoming a great player. So sometimes, a change in location, a change in scenery, being in a new environment can be positive for a player. Now, I'm under the belief that a lot of times if a player's bad in one environment, he'll be bad in the next environment too, because it's usually the player and not the circumstances around him. I think the majority of the time that's the situation. I think obviously Jerry Jeudy is the outlier on that because him getting a change of scenery has obviously been beneficial for him. You can't tell me it hasn't been, because that would be a bold-faced lie. It's been a great change of pace for Jerry Jeudy. I also think, with Amari Cooper not being there with the Browns anymore, it kind of opened things up for Jerry Jeudy to take that lead receiver role and run with it. At the same time, though, you have to give credit for Jerry Jeudy, because how many times have we seen a situation where that happens and a guy doesn't seize his opportunity? It's obvious that Jerry Jeudy seized his opportunity with the Browns. Yeah, Amari Cooper wasn't there anymore. Jerry Jeudy got his shot. Well, he delivered the goods for the Browns. He got his opportunity, then he made the most of it. So from Jerry Judy's perspective, he did what he needed to do to upgrade his level of play as a player in the National Football League. And I always think about going back to Alabama with him. He was always a very shifty route runner, a guy that was so smooth in and out of his breaks. He still got that in his game. That's still the foundation of his game, like being able to sell you in one direction and do the exact opposite. I always talk about that because deception is so important in your route running, because if you can make that cornerback get lost because he thinks you're running a route, an out route, but really he just did a head fake to the outside and he's actually running a slant. Well, now that corner bites on the out route, that head fake to the out route, but really you're running a slant. So what happens is that cornerback goes to the flats when really the wide receiver is running over the middle of the field. He just used a head fake to get separation. Jerry Jeudy does those things so well. So well. He's so shifty in his route running, so elusive in his route running. It's hard to stay on his hip because he'll just set you up and then shake you out of your cleats. I saw it on film watching him and Deshaun Watson, a lot of throws over the middle where Jerry Jeudy was just shaking and baking, getting open, and there wasn't a lot of people around him because he does a good job of selling his routes so well. So for Jerry Jeudy, yeah, he's become the player that he wanted to be when he was coming out of Alabama. And remember how coveted he was coming out of Alabama. We all knew this guy was special, but when he got to the Broncos, we were a little bit disappointed. We were a little bit disappointed because we thought he had a chance to be one of the all-time greats. And he wasn't a bad player with the Broncos. That's not what I'm saying, but he was just a good player. Just a good player. At times, just a little bit better than mediocre. At times, very good, but never was able to get to that great category. Now we're seeing him become great with the Browns, and if he keeps showing that he can be great consistently over and over again, we might start talking about him having the potential to be an all-time great. For someone that was that good at Alabama, where we all were like, this Jerry Jeudy guy is going to be special, to see him getting on the right track and getting back to the Jerry Jeudy that we were used to seeing at Alabama with the Crimson Tide, I think that says a lot about him too, because you have to remember the NFL is hyper competitive. You're going against the very best in the world. It's easy to, be a little bit behind when it comes to fulfilling your potential, which is what he was with the Broncos. Well, now we're starting to see him fulfill that potential with the Browns. So the change of scenery, Amari Cooper not being there, him being able to take that pole position is in terms of wide receivers. I'm using kind of a NASCAR reference there, the pole position, the number one position. He took it. With the Browns being that number one wide receiver, being in Cortland Sutton's shadow with the Broncos, never really. One year I think he was better than Cortland Sutton, but all the other years Cortland Sutton was better. So, the body of work there with the Broncos, it was obvious Cortland Sutton was the better player and Jerry Jeudy was in Cortland Sutton's shadow. Well, now he's proven that he's a bona fide number one wide receiver. That's what you anticipate from yourself when you're someone with the skill set and the tools that Jerry Jeudy has. And then, like I said, going back to his time at Alabama, we all knew how good he was. So to see him now with the Browns, living up to those expectations that he had coming out of Alabama, coming out of college, I think it's exciting to see for Jerry Jeudy, because you hate to see a guy not be the same player that we know he was capable of being. We had already seen it in college. And sure, a lot of guys can't make the transition to the next level and they fail to be the same players that they were in college. But it just felt like Jerry Jeudy had the skill set and the tools to be a great player in the NFL, which is what we're seeing now. Moving on, we have the Joe Burrow story. So Joe Burrow last year was just lights out for this Bengals team. Lights out. There's no other way around it. He was, he played his best football since coming into the National Football League. Now, part of that is he had the best wide receiver in the NFL by a wide margin. Jamar Chase dominated like we haven't seen a wide receiver do in some time. He was just that good, where Jamar Chase was a class above everybody else. So, having Jamar Chase certainly, I don't want to say propped up Joe Burrow. A lot of times I use the term propped up. I think about Ryan Tannehill on the Titans, when he had Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was clearly propping up Ryan Tannehill. I can't say Jamar Chase props up Joe Burrow. Don't get me wrong, don't get me wrong, Joe Burrow has a lot of help around him. He has Jamar Chase, he has T. Higgins. He's surrounded by talent, and that certainly helps him a lot. But I think with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, they both elevate each other. So it's less about being propped up, more about going back to their time together at LSU, continuing to develop that connection that they had going back to LSU, and they're still working on it to this day in the pros. And remember, Joe Burrow went to the Bengals management and said, I want Jamar Chase. He'll take us to another level. The Bengals went to a Super Bowl, so clearly Joe Burrow was right going to the Bengals front office and telling them to draft Jamar Chase. But I think it's less about being propped up and more about those two elevating each other. Now, if you said Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and remember they had, I think, Tyler Boyd at one point. If you said that propped up Joe Burrow a little bit, now you're talking about three weapons deep. To some degree, maybe that a little bit propped up Joe Burrow early on in his career. But if you're just talking about Jamar Chase, I think those guys elevate each other. And I think Joe Burrow had a big role in Jamar Chase being the best wide receiver in the NFL. And I think Jamar Chase, in return, helped Joe Burrow have his best season in the NFL since he came into the league. Those two are on the same page. They know exactly where to put the football so Jamar Chase can make the catch, haul the football in, and put up big plays for this Bengals offense. Joe Burrow, I think last year he showed a great job with his poise. I think he did a great job last year with his poise. I think he did a better job than he normally does at reading the defense, understanding what coverage they're throwing against them, dissecting that coverage and knowing where to go with the football. So to me, it was obviously the awareness for Joe Burrow that got better because, the longer you play in the NFL, the more aware you become, the smarter you become as a player because experience teaches you how to win and it teaches you different techniques that help you become successful in the NFL. So for Joe Burrow, it's looking off a defender. It's understanding, where Jamar Chase wants the football because they have continued to develop their connection. Their rhythm and timing is, at this point, it's perfected. Those are the things that helped Joe Burrow just light it up this last year. But he was putting dots all over the field, like throwing in tight windows, throwing away from the leverage of the defender. So if their offense is running a fade route with T. Higgins and that defender's on the inside towards the middle of the field, Joe Burrow is throwing towards the sideline away from the defender where T. Higgins can toe drag the catch near the sideline, haul in the pass, and move the sticks for the Bengals offense. He's just got so much better at the little details of playing quarterback to the point where it's like, okay, this is why you drafted Joe Burrow. Now, we all knew he was good because he delivered that national championship for LSU. It's just gotten to the point where he's absolutely dominating week in and week out for this Bengals offense to the point where it's bombs away. They're throwing the football all over the field. They're picking on weak defenders. They're finding the weakness in the defense. They're finding windows to throw to. Anything that can be exposed is getting exposed at this point, and Joe Burrow is not missing anything. Any opportunity that is there, he's finding them. And so much of the quarterback position is finding your opportunities. We talk about arm talent. We talk about being able to throw the football a mile. We talk about precision passing, putting your throws in a small window. But before that even can happen, you have to find your opportunities, which comes from diagnosing the defense that you're going against. Okay, they're in cover two. The safeties are split pretty wide, far apart, so we can throw it right down the middle of the field between the two safeties and beat the cover two down the middle of the field. okay, they're playing cover zero, they're blitzing, so I got to get the football out of my hands quick. But they have a weaker corner on this side of the field going against T. Higgins, so I'm going to take advantage of that matchup. So I'm going to catch the snap, I'm going to hit straight away, and I'm going to throw. Getting the football out of your hands quickly because you know you're going against cover zero and taking advantage of a favorable matchup with T. Higgins against the weaker corner. Little things like that where you break things down before the play starts at the line of scrimmage and understand what the defense is trying to do to you. Because if you're going against a cover zero where they're rushing 6 people at you, they have 4 people on the line of scrimmage that are coming at you, and they're blitzing 2 linebackers, guess what? You can't hold the football all day. You need to catch that snap and throw it immediately. Joe Burrow can do that. Against a cover 3, the corners might both be bailing, and you have to know which safety is dropping down to the flats and throw to that opposite flats where the corner's bailing and there's no one in the flat, so you have a quick hitter to your wide receiver in the open flats. It's just the little nuances of the game. Playing quarterback, knowing where to go with the football, knowing how to beat each defense. Joe Burrow has those things down to a science now this late in his career. Also helps that Jamar Chase is also emerging and playing his best football ever. So you have 2 guys that, came in close. I think Joe Burrow was a year before Jamar Chase, but 2 guys that were able to grow together, 2 guys that were able to continue to develop the connection that they had going back to LSU, but 2 guys that are also emerging in the National Football League together at the same time. You're seeing 2 guys peak, becoming more aware, becoming more confident, understanding what it takes to be successful in the NFL at the same time. Oh yeah, when they also have a history together, they won a national championship together at LSU. That's why Joe Burrow is peaking right now in his career too, to the point where, this guy is throwing the football everywhere and it doesn't look like anybody can stop him. Now, as a team, they need to get things figured out, but I'm telling you when I say this, Joe Burrow is not the problem. He's been as good as advertised for this Bengals team. And you look at all the hype he had coming out of LSU, I think he's lived up to the hype. Yeah, they didn't win that Super Bowl, but he got them to a Super Bowl. He went to upper management, the front office, and said, I need Jamar Chase. He was right in that decision. Being a young player in the National Football League, going to the front office and telling them what he needs, that takes a little bit of balls. That's leadership, by having the courage to speak up and not, being timid or afraid because you're a young player just trying to find your way. He said, the hell with that. I'm Joe Burrow. I know what I need. I know what this team needs. And then to be right, clearly he was right about that too. So Joe Burrow has been everything the Bengals have wanted and then some. That's how good Joe Burrow has been. So you have to give all the praise in the world to Joe Burrow for not only being a great football player, becoming much more aware as a quarterback, and also being a leader too, by being able to voice to the front office what this team needs. Yeah, we need Jamar Chase. Yeah, we have other holes to fill, but remember, their offensive line was really bad. They really needed to get better at offensive line to protect Joe Burrow, but Joe Burrow says, hey, we're going to go against the grain. I need you guys to get me Jamar Chase. I think him being bold like that and telling the front office what he needed, I think was just another thing that goes into the legend of Joe Burrow. So all the praise in the world for Joe Burrow. We're going to cap this episode off with the Trevor Lawrence story, the last thing we have on the ticker today. And I don't like what's happening with Trevor Lawrence. A lot of people are turning on Trevor Lawrence. This actually goes back to when he first came out of Clemson, was drafted by the Jaguars. A lot of people were saying he's going to be a bust. He'll never do the same things in the NFL that he did in college. He won't be the same player. So I think when the Jaguars have failed to kind of live up to expectations. I think people are piling on Trevor Lawrence and saying, see, we were right the whole time. This guy isn't cut out for the NFL. I'm going to push back on all that. I think sometimes when you have a team that is dysfunctional, which we all know the Jaguars are, they were bad before Trevor Lawrence got there. He kind of was starting to turn the corner a little bit when they went to the playoffs. Remember, they had that comeback against the Chargers. Now they've kind of taken a step back again, but this team has been dysfunctional for so long. Sometimes when you have a team that's dysfunctional for so long, the problems are bigger than the quarterback position. The Jaguars' problems are bigger than Trevor Lawrence. He's being held back by the Jaguars. Now, he started to make some progress when he took them to the playoffs, had that comeback against the Chargers. Still, though, this team is just, they're not well ran. How many years did they have the number one overall pick? It didn't matter who was there. They were always a bad football team. There's just something going on with the Jaguars where they can't figure it out. And Trevor Lawrence is being held back by the Jaguars. Now, he's kind of doing everything he can, but, when you're surrounded by, coaching that isn't getting it done, bad ownership, an environment where players aren't giving it their all, they're kind of just going through the motions and they're lackadaisical. The burning desire to succeed isn't there, and that's contagious for a football team. So you see Trevor Lawrence and, you say, well, he's not getting the job done, but you don't see the missed blocks up front where he's getting hit when he throws. So his pass gets telegraphed. That's why he got picked off. It wasn't really Trevor Lawrence's fault. The defense blew through the offensive line, and right as Trevor Lawrence was throwing the football, he got nailed. So his pass came out as a duck wobbling through the sky. It gets picked off, and people just see Trevor Lawrence, and they're like, this guy can't play, but they don't see the offensive line getting beat at the line of scrimmage. They don't see the wide receiver running the wrong route, and Trevor Lawrence actually throws the football where it's supposed to be, but the wide receiver ran the wrong route. When you have a losing culture, those things happen all the time. For the casual fan, they see the quarterback, struggling, but really the quarterback is struggling because the team as a whole is just really bad with a really bad culture. So guys aren't motivated to play, and so many times fans just put the blame on the quarterback. Now, I think if Trevor Lawrence left, I think he was on the 49ers in that good environment with Kyle Shanahan, I think he would make Brock Purdy look like a practice squad player. I know a lot of people are like, Brock Purdy's good, but we talked about propped up earlier. I think Brock Purdy is propped up by Kyle Shanahan, by that offensive system with all the weapons they had there. Remember, Deebo Samuel's not there anymore, but Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, this past year they had Ricky Purcell, George Kittle. I mean, don't get me wrong, last year the 49ers dealt with a lot of injuries, and what happened to Brock Purdy? Brock Purdy was not the same player when all those players were injured. So what does that tell you? He's propped up a little bit. You put Trevor Lawrence in that system with all those weapons, now Deebo Samuel isn't there anymore, but when they had Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, man, I'm telling you, and with a good offensive line, Trent Williams and the rest of the guys they have on that offensive line, with Kyle Shanahan and the execution they have in that 49ers offense, you would see Trevor Lawrence be Clemson Trevor Lawrence times 1,000. He would be bombs away. That 49ers offense would be on a whole different level. They would be night and day better than what they are with Brock Purdy. They would be so much better, you wouldn't even believe it. Trevor Lawrence would be so much better that all these haters wouldn't be able to say a peep. Put Brock Purdy on the Jaguars. You put Brock Purdy on this Jaguars team with all this dysfunction and losing culture, Brock Purdy would probably not be a starting quarterback in the NFL anymore. So now the good news for Trevor Lawrence is help is on the way. You have Travis Hunter getting there. Brian Thomas is still there. So at least at the wide receiver position, he has some help. He's got these playmakers. Now, can the other players on this team be motivated? Can they change the culture? Can that offensive line hold up? Can they execute on offense? Because the reason Kyle Shanahan and that 49ers offense is so good is because their execution is so crisp. You know, when you have bad execution on this Jaguars team, it doesn't matter if you have Travis Hunter and Trevor Lawrence because the execution's so bad that things just get botched. So we have to really watch the Jaguars' execution. If they get better from an execution standpoint, you're going to see these weapons come alive. You're going to see Trevor Lawrence come alive. But you can't just put all the blame on him and say, see, we told you so. He was always going to be a bust. I'm not subscribing to that thinking. I think he's a really good player in a really bad environment. Remember, we heard this offseason that the Steelers wanted Trevor Lawrence. I think if Trevor Lawrence went to the Steelers, I think he would be in a much better situation to the point where we saw him really start to turn the corner in his career. I think on the 49ers, he absolutely dominates. I think if he was on the Cowboys with the offense they have with CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, I think he would be in a much better situation. So think about Sam Darnold. When Sam Darnold was on the Panthers, he couldn't get anything going. Even with he had some good moments with the Jets, but get shipped off by the Jets. When he was on the Panthers, really couldn't get anything going. Then Sam Darnold, he was on the 49ers first, but eventually Sam Darnold winds up with the Vikings. The Vikings have a good offensive system. They execute well. They had Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. What happened to Sam Darnold? You put Sam Darnold, a guy that was struggling to find success, in a good offensive situation, and he was a totally different quarterback. Put Trevor Lawrence in that Vikings situation with those weapons and that execution. He would ball out. He would be great. He'd be better than Sam Darnold easily. Easily better than Sam Darnold. So much of a quarterback's success is determined and dictated by the environment they're in. Is a team able to execute on the offensive side of the ball? Do they have a coach that can drum things up on the offensive side of the ball? Is the culture good? Do they have a culture of winning? Are the players on the team, even on the defense side of the ball, even on special teams, are all those players motivated to win in the National Football League? Because if your team isn't motivated from 1 to 53, then your quarterback's in a bad situation. He's going to struggle to have success. So with Trevor Lawrence, I think he's in a bad situation, a team that always seems to have the number 1 overall pick in the draft because they're just historically bad, can't get it right. Especially recently, the last decade, they've been really bad. And I think Trevor Lawrence is actually held back. I think if the Steelers would have traded for him, he would have been better. I think if you put him on the 49ers, he balls out. I think if you put him on the Vikings with that offense they have, he balls out. I think on the Cowboys, he would have balled out. So it's really about the team. It's really about the environment, and it's really about the bad culture. Those things are bigger than the quarterback position. So don't put all the blame on Trevor Lawrence. Are you going to push a really bad player out of town if you're the Jaguars, the fans of Jacksonville? You don't want to run that guy out of town, because if you guys do get your culture right, if you do get your players motivated, then you have a really good quarterback that can take you places. But until you fix the other things, the bad culture, the lack of motivation, the problems with the Jaguars will always be bigger than the quarterback position. I'm John Kuzma. That's all I got for the latest episode of the Football Game Tonight podcast. If you want to be a member of the show, make sure to click the link in the episode description box. You can go to our Substack and become a member. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm John Kuzma. I'm signing off.